Hello and welcome to our podcast, JSB Echo. I'm Dr. Savitri, professor at Janssen School of Business. Today's episode is about people, purpose, and progress. Three words that capture how organizations are being reshaped from the inside out. We will be exploring how HR as a function is redefining leadership and culture, how a city like Coimbatore is reinventing itself for the future, and how the Gen Z is rewriting the rules of work altogether. And to lead us through these fascinating shifts, we have Mr. Rajesh, CHRO, who has seen transformation up close. Mr. Rajesh is a seasoned management professional with over 27 years of global experience across sectors, across functions, across industries, and across geographies. A unique mix for a CHRO. We will get to know about him more in the episode. Mr. Rajesh, his passion lies in helping organizations unlock their purpose and potential, and also in mentoring the next generation of leaders. Welcome to our podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me for this episode. Really powerful topic to take the three P's, purpose, progress, and people. And I chose to mix up the order because the first two cannot be done without the third one, right? So that's been my story, that's been my journey. And yes, so thank you so much for inviting. Happy to contribute and have this conversation and take it forward from here.
So to begin with, Rajesh, what do these three words mean to you?
A very interesting question. So I would like to begin with purpose. That's a good place to begin in the first place, right? So without purpose, how would things occur, right? I mean, they would just occur as a series of activities, a series of things, right? Things that keep us busy and keep us doing that without having a purpose, right? Purpose serves as a North Star. It kind of guides us as to where is it that we want to take it. So my personal experience has been that whenever one has either done actions oneself or seen organizations operate without having a strong anchor to purpose, then you would see the busyness side of business and not the business side of business, right? So you will see a bunch of ants on a piece of land, right? When you're running around here, they're helter-skelter, but nobody knows what is it that they're actually trying to get there. So purpose is super ordinate in my mind. Like I said, multiple experiences. I mean, through the course of this conversation, I would like and cover some of those things. Organizations with purpose and organizations, trying to find their purpose and trying and growing, right? And then kind of plateauing out because without purpose you can't grow, right? So that's one. On the people side, people are everything. Otherwise, we are just a bunch of bricks and steel and and roofs and chairs and tables and all that, right? So while it is the machine age, and for the last 80, 90 years we've been doing a lot of stuff with machines, it is the man behind the machine that really gives it a sense and gives it direction and gives it, why are we doing business in the first place? It's to improve people's life, right? So the best thing to do is to understand people from both sides, internally from those who are making things or services, and the outside those who are consuming those products or services, right? So unless you get a good handle of what people are all about, your purpose will not have its landing. It will take off, but it will not know where to land, right? And thirdly, I kind of missed that. Progress, right? So when people and purpose align together, the right vectoring of these two forces should be progress, right? There can be a bunch of people with purpose and very motivated people, but if it's not driven towards progress, then you have anarchy, right? Then you have chaos. Then you have the other, everything in inverse, everything in negative, right? So you have the negative of progress, right? So the right vectoring of people and purpose gives you progress, right? And that is the very purpose or the very meaning of existence, as a man, human, or as an industrial person, right? I mean, is that you need to have progress. You need to move from A to, A++ and then onwards. So, yeah.
So it's the people are the force that connects purpose and performance.
Yeah, because otherwise, what is purpose? I mean, purpose is, you would see that on a poster, in any company's wall or something like that. It's just a string of words, very nicely articulated and strung together, right? But people are the one that actually give it life. They breathe, they breathe life into it, right? The word that I struggle to find a good English word for it, but in Sanskrit we have a word called as it's like prana pradhisthana of purpose is by the people, right? It is what breathes life into a purpose and gives it a sense. So from that perspective, yes, people are important, because without that they cannot, purpose doesn't find expression.
Okay. In your recent TED talk, you made a very powerful statement that businesses don't fail for lack of money, but for lack of meaning. Can you unpack that for us?
Interesting. Thank you. Good pick. Opportunities and how those opportunities will manifest is an approximate science, right? But it's very economics. It is straight lineable. You can plot a graph on it, a chart on it, and all that, right? The reason why I'm saying that is because depending on how the slope of that graph is, investors, be it entrepreneurs or funding agency, they would be happy to fund that, right? So those things will always have, will have funds, right? And if funds is the blood that runs an organization, right? So once you have those funds, you can grow the organization theoretically, right? But without having the right purpose aligned to that, those funds will go waste, right? I mean, it's like, a medical analogy would be like giving blood transfusion to a dead body types. Okay, so it is that in itself will not make, if it were that easy, everybody would have been a billionaire, right? So having purpose is what will help guide you, right? The bigger the purpose, the bigger the bigger the enrollment that you can do to take people along, whether internal or your customers, and then get them to walk the journey together, right? And that togetherness is what the real fulfilling part of running a business is, right? It's not just the money part of how much, how good a money machine I am, right? How efficiently I'm using money, how largely can I borrow money, or how much money can I generate. All this serves I would call it like on the right-hand side of the equator, right? But on the left-hand side is where all the magic happens, all the math happens. On that side, purpose is that silent, in white font, thing that hangs there, which gives it a defining meaning. Otherwise, yeah.
But then you've spent a large part of your career in performance-driven sectors like oil and gas and energy. And I don't think in any of these places people talk about culture or purpose and things like that. So how did you make the leaders of those companies see that purpose can lead to hard business results?
Very beautiful question. So very rarely do people actually articulate purpose or culture, right? Do we do that in our families?
I don't think.
We don't do that, right? So we don't go back and say the purpose for this month or the purpose for this year, the purpose of your life, my dear daughter. No, we don't have that kind of conversation, right? But intuitively, instinctively, everything is guided towards a North Star, right? So that's the same thing that happens in an organization, right? If an organization is intentionally or very consciously articulating purpose, then it sounds plastic, right? In the initial stages, maybe, but afterwards, it has to be felt, it has to be experienced. When people say, where is all this aligning? Why are we doing what we are doing? Or why are we not doing what, looks into? Then you would say, because, that's where the North Star is and that's where you need to go to, right? So large organizations or successful organizations or organizations which are building for success, right? They don't have to be shrill about it, right? They don't have to scream from the rooftop saying that our purpose and all that. That purpose will be experienced, that purpose will be felt, right? People would know that what's going on there intuitively, right? And let's also not, I come from that school of belief that, individual and collective intelligence of every human is super ordinate. Right? They're able to discern intuitively, right? There's this part of the brain which does that. They're intuitively able to figure out truth from, like truth. Okay, so they're able to figure that out, right? And they are able to experience that. So successful organizations or organizations, like I said, who are building for success, they are not shrill about, about purpose or culture and all that. It is felt, it is experienced, it is loved. Now, the good part, the test for that is that when you remove that, everything collapses. That's when you know that it is there. Right? Exactly how it is in our families, right? It's no, the smallest organization is a family, right? So exactly like how it occurs in our own homes, is how it occurs in organizations, right? That's the desire. I think that's where every organization, every business leader or CHRO works towards, to ensure that how do you make it subtle yet meaningful.
Okay, so that's a very refreshing way to, but then, okay, let's get into the heart of your expertise, that is HR. Tell me how the role of HR has evolved, and also tell me, like, what does it mean to be a CHRO in 2025?
Okay. So I would probably believe that one of the first forms of management was people management. Why else would you need management in the first place, right? I mean, an entrepreneur or an inventor or innovator would come up with a product or service, and there's a market which exists for that. So they go do it, right? No, you can't, right? Because you need to scale, you need to produce, and that's when you have to put people together to do a work in a systematic, predictable fashion, right? And so therefore, the first few things that emerged was management skills, finding the people, getting them to align, ensuring that they are error-free, that ensuring that their comforts are taken care of, so that they can focus only on work. So I think people management was, or in those days it was known as people managers, right? So people management was probably the first, right? I'm not an expert on that, and I don't want the Nobel. So I would assume that the people management would be the first form of management that existed. From that, and probably this was just before the start of the industrial age, right? Of course, I'm not saying that production and scale didn't happen before that. Agriculture, army, so many things happened there, right? But let's contextualize it for the industrial world, right? So just before the explosion of industrialization, right? That's when people management would have started having some, this is my hypothesis, that they would have formed some structures or ways in which you can get people, that if you have to induct them, it is better to get 10 of them together or 100 of them together, 1,000 of together, induct them, so that repetitions are minimized, and standard inputs are given. So yeah, from that stage, a lot of journey was covered by HR. Right, and you have got some very pioneering research that happened, because the best part of HR is that it's in the theater of mind, right? Because you have to visualize, conceptualize, contextualize, and then put it together, right? So it's a theater of the mind, right? How big and deep can you, think about, right? So a lot of things have happened. A lot of research has happened. Academia got involved in it in a big way to figure out. And you have organizations like the Aristotle Institute, and they will come up with some really epochal quality of work in terms of how people management happened. And then it moved down there, the journey of, the lives of Peter Drucker and, so on. So it moved forward from there, right? But somehow, somewhere, in my hypothesis, that probably it missed out on the technology bus, right? So, so one of the first few guys to get onto that bus, whether by choice or design, was the finance and accounts guy, because ERPs came in, and then, because they came in, they had to structure and standardize, accounting practices and principles across the world to ensure that there's a standard method of doing it. And as organizations move internationally, there's a standard method in which they operate. But the same organization, the same set of people, and the same guy on the same table, right, which is the CHR, probably they didn't get together, or there was no industry body or something like that which got together and ensured that there has to be a standardized way in which people are also done, right? Of course, this can be argued that are we, dehumanizing people, right, by putting everybody into a structure and all that. Well, yes and no, because say about 50-60% of people management is structured work, right? If there is a structure, why can't that structure be standardized? And you can change your USL and LSL, upper limit and lower limits, right? But then have a band, a broad area within which things are done, and standardize it across industry, across geography, across the world, so that a whole set of things becomes mechanistic and manageable part of it, right? What that does is it frees up the rest of the people, the rest of the man managers, the people managers, to do real quality work, which is understand what we started off with theater of the mind, right? Figure out and say what really excites people, what moves things forward. So today, coming back to where we are, to your question as to in 2025, so we are, we are on a precipice of significant change, right? I mean, on one hand, you have the LLM-led, GPTs, which is kind of making knowledge and information, accessible to just about everybody, right? Today, that is not a premise of anybody, right? I may or may not know anything about labor law, right? Or about IT practices, right? But 10 questions, 3 seconds, boom, right? At least I'm not ignorant, right? Half an hour of doing this work, I go beyond ignorance to being at least basic level awareness, right? One day at it, and I am at a, above basic proficiency level, right? Of course, it needs application and all that. 2 more weeks of testing it out and doing things individually, I am borderline expert on it. Do I need to do the coding on it, or will I be able to stand in court and have a legal conversation with a labor law lawyer? No. But I would be able to spot and find out if he's saying the right thing or not right thing, right? So what would have taken 10 years is now taking 2 weeks and things like that. So AI and the LLM GPTs, they are completely changing the game on this part, right? That's where HR finds itself. Similarly, on a lot of other things, right? The standard thing, which is your entire employee lifecycle management, anticipating training needs, putting your basic, work tools in place and all that, right? So that's what is getting done. So therefore, what is the thing that needs to get done, right? What needs to get done is core HR, right? Which is saying that when I come from an hypothesis, believes that a good HR guy is like the Air Force or an armed forces, right? You need to have very long range vision. You are driving the most expensive assets in the military. You have a very little, very tiny, error for margin of error. You have the highest impact on time and money, right? So $100 million missile in your hand is more valuable than, $101 million equipment in somebody else's hand, right? So, so that's where a good HR head in 2025 should be, that he sees himself as the head of an Air Force of the business world. And how does he or she take the next step in terms of giving a cutting edge advantage to the organization? So that's where I see it. But it's a long journey. It's easier to understand, maybe. Some even struggle with visualizing it, saying, okay, what does Air Force mean and how is it different? So, but that's my hypothesis. Long answer, but hopefully I covered some ground.
Yeah, but then I was thinking we have evolved dramatically, but this sounds like we haven't evolved much from the compliance-driven HR systems to where we are today.
Incrementality, I think that's where the trap of HR has been for the last 50, 60, 70 years. In my hypothesis is that we've been doing tiny things and hoping that big things will come out of it, right? Those only happens in children's riddle books, right? When you join off your dot and the picture will emerge, right? In life, it doesn't emerge like that. Life is just like how we started this conversation from the purpose perspective, right? You have to have a larger order goal and then work below that. Like how they say that, a big temple or a cathedral is built from the star downward. It's not that you put brick on a brick together and then suddenly you reach the top of it. No, you don't. You have to have the vision, which is where the pinnacle of the cathedral or the temple is going to be, and then work backwards towards it and see that, that's when things align, right? Yeah, but we haven't done that because we've been caught up with incrementality. We've been making some, a few tinker here, a few tinker there. I'm not disputing, or I don't mean any disrespect for the, for the folks who actually did that and who practice it even today. But be mindful that it is incremental. And incrementality, while important, will not take you to bigger goals, right? Bigger goals have to be visualized, taken with a very, very high degree of failure, right? You have, you got to be happy with a 1% or a 2% chance of success, right? Which means you have to have tolerance for 98% failure, right? Now it means that 98 out of 100 people will fail. It means 98 out of 100 efforts will fail. It means 98 out of every 100 minutes that you put in work, will fail, to have the resilience, whether as organization, as societies, to live with this thing, right? That is what, in my mind, is probably going to, take the function of HR to the next realm from where it currently is. So.
Okay, so that brings me to the next question. Do the HR folks really have a seat in the table?
Interesting question, right? Now, two ways to look at it, right? One is the DEI method, saying that, oh, he is also a CHRO, so we need a place on the table. That comes from an entitlement mindset, right? Or, from our language, we will say here, we will say reservation mindset. From the all CHRO sit, so I also sit. But that isn't probably the right method to look at it, right? The right method to look at it would be to say that, do I do enough? Or are my peers and me doing enough to demand a seat, to be invited to the high table, right? Not reserved for table, right? Because if you have reserved table there, you can have the donuts and you can have the coffee, it can go, right? But no, it's not for that, right? We get invited to the table saying that, hey, we are looking at a business solution, we need to solve it, we need to move into this country, blah, blah, blah. Oh, damn, I haven't spoken to the HR. Oh, let me call the HR guy and say, can you help me do that? Because we are planning this and all that. What's your take on that? And then the HR guy participate not just as a subject matter expert, but as a business expert. You sure you want to go to this market? Are you sure you're evaluating this? But your competition is doing that. Think about it this way. I mean, next to the CEO, probably the HR person is the only one who has the widest and the deepest perspective of an industry. You know why? Because, let me speak for myself. As an HR head, I am meeting the equivalents of my company peers every week, right? Either for an interview or in a complex or through somebody, I get to know what's happening in the industry, right? I get to know what's happening. Do I get to know it to an extent where I can be be an innovator myself? Maybe, maybe not. But I get to know that something is cooking in some place, or I know that something is not cooking in some place, right? And this knowledge, this information is gold, right? So there's a huge thing that a good CHRO can actually bring to the table, right? But just because you are at the table doesn't mean you have access to the information. So you have to do all the groundwork this way, like how in my school days when I used to be a boxer, right? One of the things that we learned was that, what happens in the 3-minute round in the ring is a reflection of what happened for like 300 days outside the ring in the gym, right? If you cheated one day there, you will get caught here in a 3-minute round. Right? So that's the same equivalent that happens for the CHRO on the table, right? Everything that you do behind the scene in your work, in your area, will get that invitation come to you to be on the table. And when it comes, you'll be able to participate, not as a functional expert, not as a subject matter guy, but as someone who, with a good sense or a good grip on business, and as another business person, right? So, that's the right way to look at it. Right?
That's an amazing perspective. So this brings to the next powerful shift. So Rajesh, you have worked with young professionals across industries and countries. This generation, that is Gen Z, is very confident, they are purpose driven, and they're also tech savvy. But the way they look at work is very, very different, isn't it? So how do you think this Gen Z differs from the previous generations in their approach to work and meaning?
Very interesting perspective and question, right? So let's look at what's unique about Gen Z, right? One of the things that I find very unique about, and this is my hypothesis about Gen Z, is that this is a generation that grew up without a sense of scarcity. Every generation before that had something which was scarce, right? Either it was material things, or it was funds, or it was opportunity. Probably the Gen Z has grown with the least amount of scarcity. So that's the way I would look at it, right? Now, of course, I sound like an old man in saying that, right? And I'm sure that, my parents would have said the same thing about us when we were growing up, right? So that being said, let it be what it is, right? So material scarcity has been at its least, right, in this generation, right, for the people born after 2000, which is Gen Z, right? So for the last 25 years, if you look at it across the world, most things are available, right? But I think that the number one thing that has become really available is knowledge, right? The generation immediately before that also, knowledge wasn't as widely available, right? I mean, imagine, the amount of hours that you have to spend in libraries scouring through books and taking notes and then summarizing it and then making a final summary of summary notes and to distill multiple things down to one topic versus your ability to first go through Google and then look at it and now through ChatGPT to say so knowledge scarcity is just not there, right, in this generation. That's unique about Gen Z. So you're right. So all of them have grown up. Everybody knows a little bit of everything, which is good, right? Because there is no gaps to that extent there. There's also the other thing that has changed significantly in Gen Z is the definition of family, right? So it's been more nuclear and smaller compared to larger, wider ones, right? So what that has done is that you're probably not seeing as much attention deficient kids growing up in this generation than in the previous one, right? There is deficiency, but this deficiency comes from both parents working and not having enough time or something like that, but not otherwise, right? So, so you have a bunch of youngsters who are very knowledgeable, very energetic, self-confident because they have, been loved in their formative years. So when they are coming out to the workforce is when they become Gen Z, and at that stage they're more demanding. They know, they're very clear about what is it that they want. Or let me put it the other way around. They're very clear what it is that they don't want, right? So they're very, very clear about that, right? So, so that's where the Gen Z is, right? So some of them, like in all generations, but maybe a little less, but in some of them in Gen Z have skills. Most of them do not have skills per se, right? So they are, so how would you call it? They are knowledgeable. They are dynamic, they are self-confident, with borderline skills, right? So that's a very interesting mix for the next level of managers or people managers to now figure out, saying that how do you actually handle a self-confident? There is no behavioral science theory to handle this part, right? You have a self-confident, knowledgeable, person who is very clear of what he or she doesn't want to do, but is borderline on skill and competency, right? So I think the next level of poverty in this generation is going to be in the skill and competency part, right? So,
okay, so what are those key skills or mindsets they need if they have to thrive in this AI-driven environment?
Yeah, because see, the routine part the machine will handle, right? But what to tell the machine and how the machine has to configure itself, or what the next generation of machine is going to be, that has to come from this. So the skills are going to be on that level, right? The skills are going to be on the level of imagination. The skills are going to be on the level of knowing some basic stuff of how to make things or how to conceptualize things and do things. So you better know your coding, you better know your analytical skills and all that. The machine will do 80-90% of everything, but you need to tell it what to do, right? So that ability to tell and have a conversation with an inanimate, which is equally powerful in brain capacity, linear processing capacity. But to ask from it, that is a skill that would be required. Communication is also a huge skill that would be required, right? Because this is a text generation. This is a look good, feel good, say good, generation. But truth still is the sweetest of all languages, right? But how do you express and put that truth together or forward? That becomes a critical aspect there. So I think some of those skills that are required are like that, just like conceptual skills. Next one is knowing the next generation of anticipation, right? And how do you anticipate the next thing that is going to come? That's one. And of course, communication skills. So yeah.
Okay, so from the organizational standpoint, do we have the strategies to attract these kind of people?
So yes and no. Again, it is the dilemma of choice, right? So you know what is there, but you know you're not able to assimilate it, right? I mean, it's like somebody said, if I were to give you a Lamborghini, Rajesh, where will you park it? Right. So it is knowing is one part, right? The other part is, okay, now that you got it, how do you handle that, right? So so most organizations know what Gen Z is and the complexity or how they have to rearrange themselves to, welcome this workforce in. But they do not know how to make that happen, right? Yet, some organizations have done some really, great experimental work. I don't think there is any, QED or something which has been completely locked and, tied down. But some organizations do know, or they have been experimenting with things. Say, will this work? Will this work? Will this work? So yeah, so flexi timing, work from office, not from work from office, staycations, and so many innovative methods. Companies themselves are shifting out from larger metropolises and moving into areas which have cleaner air, better quality of life, better air. So yeah, so a lot of things have to change. So right now, the thing to learn is that an organization can't anchor itself and say, how do I control this? What it has to learn is that when you have all strings in the air, right, it's like a parachute. Everything is in the air, right? Yet you have to vector it or arrange it all together and give it grounding. So, so that's where it's a struggle. I think people are learning, but they're learning on the move. So again, your appetite, your ability and appetite to take risks and walk a different path. Coming back to the earlier question, I was saying that when you live with 2% success, which means 98% failure, the higher your probability or propensity to do that, the better your ability to absorb those organizations, right? What Gen Zs really like is that they like authenticity, right? If you make an effort to be meaningful for them, they sense it. You needn't succeed for it, right? You just have to be authentic in your efforts to welcome them in. And I think that is where the large struggle is going to be. So, yeah.
Okay, so from what you said, now that we know what their priorities are, like flexibility and things like that, is it not pushing organizations to change certain things in the organization?
Yeah, but isn't that a good thing, right? So, as a change management professional, I would say you should always be ready for change. And some change you can plan, other change is forced on you, and you figure out a method of living, right? So I think it's a good thing. If they're forcing organization, they were forcing guys like me and my peer group who've been sitting on our backsides figuring out things that okay, we have figured it out. Now we just need to find the right, living body whole and just to make. No. So these guys are coming and saying that, the way you have done, why would I need to come to the office? Why do I need to travel 45 minutes or 45 kilometers to come to your office? To do what? To just punch in and come so that it'll be easy for you to, when I'm going to log in at my home, you figure out a method of figuring out whether I'm working or not, right? So those are first principle questions that is being asked, and that is so beautiful, so nice. I personally and professionally, I would welcome those kind of things, right? Because they're forcing us to go back to the drawing board and do first principle thinking and come up with something. And I think that's the richness of this generation, right? Their ability to ask questions directly or indirectly. And I think that's the right thing to do. So yeah, I would welcome those questions. And I think that's an opportunity. Again, some will anticipate this and correct themselves. Others will quickly listen to it and then, respond to it. Yet many others will defy it and push back and say confirm or, yeah, so there will be different life outcomes for those organizations depending on their paths they choose. So yeah, that's what I would say.
So that again makes me think of one more question, like what kind of leadership styles will work for this generation?
Unknown. I would be a millionaire very soon if I had an answer for that, right? I could publish my book and, no, you have no idea for that, right? You have absolutely no idea. What I would still think is that going back to the, very early days of management, right? How are we bringing up our kids and what successes do we have at our homes, right? You'll have to mirror the same thing in the office setting, right? Give them the freedom to fix it, to choose, give them the freedom to fail, give them the freedom to not log in, right? Technically, not log in. So I don't feel like it. Yeah. It's okay. Okay. Now that will challenge your manpower planning, that will challenge your skill inventory, that will challenge your telling. Yeah, but then let it challenge it, right? Go figure out a method. Your laziness to find a solution doesn't mean the question is wrong, right? A question is a question. Figure out the right answer for that. I think that's the thing to do, right? So, yeah, so there is no right behavioral type or personality type as a manager for managing this. Being open, being ready for being asked first principle questions and then being honest and saying that, oh, that's a good question, I don't have an answer, but can we create an answer together? Those kind of, the humility will, bring truthfulness will, survive. Being open to experimenting with a very high chance of failure, that will be a very good skill. Mix all this together and whatever personality type emerges would be the successful people manager of this generation, I guess. So.
Okay, so that's very insightful. Looks like the future belongs to those organizations who are able to accommodate the characteristics of this Gen Z. And I think there's a lot to learn from them.
Yeah.
Just not understand them, but a lot to learn from them so that we make those changes.
Think about it this way, right? If you can't figure out how to work with them or get them into your, work setting, what hope in hell do you have of, of getting them to be your customers in the first place, right? Because whether you want them as employees or not, you certainly want them to be buyers, right? And they are 25 now. I mean, the first guy is 25 now, right? Probably has enough dispensable income, has a purchasing propensity, and you want his money, right, for your service, product or service. How are you going to have that conversation with him, right? If you're not even able to have a conversation, to have him on this side of the table, right? So whether you want it or not, the Gen Z is around us. You're going to be serving them, right? So go figure out a method and say how you're going to cater to them as employees or as consumers, right? So that's my hypothesis. So the same problem, whether it's a marketing guy, a sales guy, or an HR guy. As when it comes to Gen Z, you have to have coordinated. Again, the lack of coordination is something really funny in large corporates. But you would probably need to coordinate that because if you can't figure out how they can be employees, you will never be able to figure out how they can be consumers, right?
Something to deeply reflect on.
Correct.
Rajesh, let's bring the focus a little closer to home. That's Coimbatore. Mm-hmm. It's a city known for its rich industrial heritage, and it's also evolving into a hub of education, startups, technology, innovation, all these things. And I'm sure you've been observing the changes very closely. So how do you see Coimbatore's business and talent landscape evolving?
Very big question on macroeconomics, but yeah. So, from my perspective, when I have seen Coimbatore as, it's a very blessed land. So many entrepreneurs, and the last, I think it was clearly ahead of Chennai also in terms of its engineering prowess and all that, right? So the ability to make things in the 70s, 80s, and all that, we were huge stalwarts, giants who walked this land, who made those industries really come up, right? Be it textile or automobile or automobile engineering or motors, electrical equipments and stuff like that. So very powerful history that has there, right? And then some of them have continued, some of them have plateaued, others have gone by. But the land has its own ethos, right? So I'm so encouraged to see so many other entrepreneurs coming here, right? So, one sector that I follow very closely is the defense and aerospace industry. So, when I look at that, I was just very surprised to see there's quite a bunch of young, companies which are there. Same on the EV side, same on IT, right? So they have moved from those standard electrical and equipment-based things to the next generation, and there's a fresh generation of entrepreneurs coming. The other beautiful thing about the city is that there's always a bunch of entrepreneurs, be it in food, be it in entertainment, be it something or the other keeps on happening. So this is a very blessed land, Coimbatore. So I think that Coimbatore has a huge future in terms of what it has to offer for the country, for Tamil Nadu, and for itself, right? So I think it's in a very, very nice place. Even geographically, it's a nice place, right? So clean air, great, the foothills, great weather, great people, phenomenal culture, long history. So yeah, it's so beautifully endowed. Coming back to that whole thing that there is people, there is purpose now. All that needs to happen for Coimbatore is get progress into its path, and I'm sure it will head in that direction. I think in the next 3, 5, 7 years, you're going to see a completely different version of Coimbatore. I think it would be a city to watch out for, and not for its factories and things like that, but for its really creative entrepreneurial juice. good thing about entrepreneur, I mean, I know I'm digressing, but the good thing about entrepreneurialism is that, what an entrepreneur does is it creates value out of nothing that existed before, right? And that's where value creation happens. And for me, magical. You can see me, I just get all excited when I talk about entrepreneurs. So Coimbatore is very, very lucky to be endowed in that talent. So I think Coimbatore has a huge potential, or a path ahead for itself. So, yeah.
Okay, that's the best thing about Coimbatore. They have that entrepreneurial spirit in their DNA itself. Now, all this discussion of funnels down to my last question. That is, you're also closely associated with the academia. So tell us what role we institutions have to play in nurturing the next wave of talent, at least for this region.
Very interesting. So I know academia also has its own limitations because it has to operate within boundaries which are designed, and some of those boundaries are a bit dated and may not be contemporary for the current generation. But I know you're not into adult education, right? So I know that the input into academia, and Coimbatore has a bunch of academia, especially in management education. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and I do a lot of pro bono work around that. So if you look at management education, there are about 100, 110 or such institutes in Coimbatore alone, right? And if you add all the neighboring districts, you'll have another 100, I guess, right? So, and if you take about 100 people per institution, about 10,000 people that are getting trained every year. So, powerful set of change makers that you're handling. So as academia, with your limitations that the universities impose onto you, nevertheless you still have to make you have to learn to communicate to the Gen Zs, right? So figure out a method of how do you take those concepts and contextualize the learning for them, right? Just telling the concept in itself will not make any will not cut much ice, because that they can go through their LLMs and GPTs and figure out how to solve that, right? So how do you contextualize it and solve and pose it as a problem with the learning outcome for them, right? Number one. Number two is that we started with the premise saying that Gen Z is not very skill based, right? They are knowledge based. They're more on the brain, less on the hands and legs side, right? So how do you make learning through action? How do you work your syllabus around saying that? So we are going to look at, say, employee life cycle, and start at the beginning of recruitment. What I want you to do is that we are hiring 3 security guards. I want you all to go and design a job description, Now they are learning things, right, by doing it. So you're also, one, your teaching method evolved. 2, you're teaching hands-on skills for them to figure out which language works, which language doesn't work, right? The third thing that I would say is that, you probably need to throw a lot of industry folks into here, and for having participative conversations, right? Not talks, not those stand on the podium and preach, right? No, not that. I think the kids will sleep, right? So you got to get them into a sandbox, right? And then find it out, right? Let them have their hypothesis. The kids challenge the hypothesis. The kids will have a hypothesis. Let somebody else prove or disprove it. Have that debate, like a very healthy, very acrimonious, emotionally charged, but only from those manthans or those deep churning will nectar of learning emerge. That's my hypothesis on that.
So thank you. That was a very meaningful and, as I said, deeply reflective conversation. Thank you for sharing your perspectives and your experiences with us, and for your time as well. For our listeners, thank you for tuning into our podcast, and we hope today's episode gives you something to think about, whether you're a leader or a student or somebody who's passionate about how people and purpose drives progress. So stay curious, stay inspired, and keep leading with purpose. Thank you.
Thank you so much.